Okay, since we're now recording, might as well get started. So, hi everyone. I know two of you pretty well. Hi to Brent. I probably, if I saw your face, would recognize you. So, I mean, like in person, if that makes more sense. I'm a very silhouette-y person because I don't have the ability to see very well sometimes. So, anyways, welcome to my Genghis Khan class. I decided to do this one because I saw a really awesome documentary that had some very points that I'm like, not really. But it's on Hulu if you guys want to watch it. It's still a pretty good documentary. Um, but then it also got me thinking how much we combine Mongol history and attribute to Genghis Khan versus that was not really Genghis Khan. We'll talk more about the myths towards the end, but I might hint at them throughout hey, we'll talk about this later. Um, that and I'm a huge Genghis Khan nerd. I literally there was an exhibit out in Idaho Falls that I went to with my mom, and I got censored because of my mom. We literally had to be like, "Oh, hey, oh, this is you got this, oh, this," and we would literally then turn the corner in this exhibit, and my mom would be like, "You need a spoiler warning on your mouth." Like, good job, Ashleigh, being the spoiler. Like they're talking about it now, but you had to say it back there. So there's my nerdiness coming out, obviously. So, anyways, to talk about him, I'm gonna start altering his name system for a little bit. Genghis Khan is actually a European form of his name well, it's not even his name, it's his title. But it had been pronounced Chenggis, so it had been Chenggis Khan instead of Genghis Khan. So to start off, better talk about his family. Like, who is this guy? Why is he able to rise to power? And what was his motivation in that? And to kind of start with that, we can talk about his dad. His dad was the term Khan means ruler. And he comes from a long line of Khans. In fact, his grandfather um, is Kublai Khan, who technically united Mongolian for a period of time. So a lot of people had respect for his grandfather. His father, who his father wasn't directly in line. His father's uncle was, because his father uncle had no children. It became his father, and then it became him because, well, there's more to that story about how he became ruler in that aspect too. But we'll talk about that in a future slide. So his father already had this respect. His ancestors had the respect. He wasn't just someone who came out of nowhere. Not that he didn't have his own life challenges, but he didn't come from nowhere. He actually had some entitlement within his family. And basically all Khan really was a Khan was a leader of a group of families. So, you might have one or two tribes combined, and the leader of those, 2 to 3 tribes, maybe 4, that was a Khan because he ruled over a group of people. His mother, Holun, she was a daughter of a popular tribe. It was a really popular tribe for a lot of Khans to find brides from. But she wasn't originally his father, Usage's wife. In fact, he actually kidnaps and abducts her, which is really common marriage practice at this time. And he takes Hulun to be his principal wife. Obviously, that did anger some people that she was kidnapped, and we'll get more into kind of some of the consequences of that. But she was treated very well, and even within Mongol history, she's considered the mother of the nation. She wasn't just the mother of Genghis Khan; she was the mother of the nation. So was changed his name again from Chenggis Khan now to Temujin, which was his birth name. Um, and Temujin comes from a leader of another Khan, another group of tribes that was recently conquered. And so by taking that leader's name, it was an act of, stealing a name, which in this culture, names are kind of important. And so when you see an act that involves stealing names, or anything name related, it's kind of a big deal. Now, we don't really know for sure when he was born. There's a couple of different guesses, which is 1155, 1162, and 1167, based on some of the dates of his children being born, and kind of like, oh, he might have been too old to do this if this really happened when he was born. If he was born this year, this would be a little late for this. So most people agree that about 1162 is probably when he was born, give or take a year. And of course, obviously being, an important historical figure, there's a lot of, a lot of stories are based around him. And one of them ones, of course, is when he was born that he has a blood clot in his hand. And that was a symbol of, being a great warrior, like he was destined. And of course, that's probably something that came a little later on that, people are like, oh, we need to make him sound great. He was destined to be this, which, actually, if you looked at it, if for one key there was one key instance in his life that probably triggered him becoming the person who he is. If that did not happen, probably none of this actually would have happened. He probably wouldn't have been, going around conquering. But because a certain event happened, you have this man who's kind of looking out. I wouldn't say revenge so much as reminding people of cultural traditions and you screwed up. Um, Another factor that kind of was against Genghis Khan, as I said, he wasn't necessarily destined to be the person he was. He was actually the second son of his father. But he was the firstborn of his primary wife, Holon. There was a secondary concubine who had a brother, a son, about 2 years before Temujin was born. So he did have some competition. He had this older brother, even if it was a half brother, and from a minor wife, that brother could potentially, have become the ruler and not Genghis Khan, as what ended happening. From his mother, he did end up with another 4 brothers and a sister, and then there's 2 brothers with the second wife, of course. And if you guys ever have any questions, like slow me down, speak up, tell me to stop for a second if you have any questions, okay? Okay, so, and that moment that I said was a huge factor, it comes at age 8. This is the year that really defines what ends up happening to Temujin and why he becomes the great leader that he does. So at age 8, his father decides it's time to find a bride for you. You're gonna get there, and eventually you're gonna be ready to have kids. So at age 8, they go looking for a bride, and they end up finding a tribe that was related to his mother's family. Now, it wasn't his mother's family specifically. It was like, kind of like, oh, distant cousin status. So that was a point for there. The leader of this group had a young daughter, Borte. So bonus, there's a kid around my own kid's age. This might be the one. And so Temujin's actually left with them. He's there to pay off the bride price. And when time comes, they will marry and return back to his own family. But on the way back to it, Yosuke is stopped for the night, and he ends up at a camp of Tartars, which are enemies to his family. Now, in Mongol culture, there's a tradition of hospitality, and if someone's coming to your door, you're supposed to treat them hospitable. You don't go around stabbing them in the back. And while the Tartars didn't stab him in the back, they poisoned Yosuke. He is able to end up to get back home, but he ends up dying 3 days later. And of course, Ward has to get back to Chenggis Khan. Oh, there's my picture right there. I'm like, panic moment. So he's 8 when his dad dies. And of course, as I said, his older half brother is at this time about 10. And none of the other families in this tribe group are loyal to, either Temujin or his brother. They're like, we have no loyalties to this family at this moment. They can come back when they're older, but we're leaving. We're gonna go find, someplace else. And so that really breaks up all the subjects that was under his father, and it leaves just a few servants, the mothers and the kids, all there, and it ends up making them live in poverty. They have to scrape by to get food. His mother has to go out hunting, she has to go foraging, but somehow they manage to stay alive, which is pretty awesome. And this is one of the reasons Holden is considered the mother of the nation. She has to raise these kids in this really difficult circumstances as the primary wife, and she has to lead her people. So that's, as I said, that's why she ends becoming very admired in Mongol history. And well, actually, that first picture that we had, let me go back. This one is actually a statue of herself, because she's really well respected. And there's people who come up, and it's kind of like an ancestor worship where people do come up to this statue and leave flowers and little gifts, kind of like as I said, praying to her as an ancestor. And we'll get more into her lineage and what if she's really the mother of the nation or not, because there's a lot of mythology on that as well. So some people, of course, think of Chenggis Khan as a villain. And when I was doing my research, he really only becomes a villain before he's ever Chenggis Khan. And we can really justify some of his later actions and his brutality in other ways, because his brutality wasn't as necessarily as brutal as we think. So Temujin, him and his older brother don't get along, and his name's Better, and Better ends up really bullying both Temujin and his siblings. So in revenge, Temujin and one of his other brothers ends up killing Betor. Um, and this is a societal taboo. This is like you just killed your family member. This is, ex-nay. It wasn't even justified if he was, being a bully or anything. You did something that you should completely have never done. And so it's really, really frowned upon, and he is essentially a criminal. Um, and the other clans in the area hear this that he's killed Better, you know. So they kind of force Huolan's hand, where she's not able to protect Temujin. She's either I have to give up this one son to protect my rest of my kids, and that's what she ultimately does. She has to do a little tough loving on Temujin, and he is taken prisoner by other clans. Um, and of course, during this time, he's actually switched between different groups, so he's not with one group for very long necessarily. He goes back and forth, and he sees during this time people who treat him kindly versus people who treat him roughly. He is beaten a lot. But that's, as I said, a societal thing. They see him as a criminal at this point. He broke a societal taboo. He does not deserve to be treated right. Um, as I said, some people give him a little mercy. In fact, one time, and this is towards the end of him being a prisoner, he's about 15, 14 about this time. But he ends up running away at one point. And there's a search party that's sent out to find him, and he hides along this bank of a river. And he hears them; they're right overhead. He looks, cranks his head, and he sees someone staring him dead in the eyes. And he figures at this point, oh, gig's up. I'm gonna get in trouble. I'm probably gonna get beaten again, but I'm caught. And that person recognizes him, and he clearly sees him in the darkness because it's night by this time. And he turns away. He realizes that, enough's enough. You're kind of really treated poorly, even, as a kid. And this is one of those turning points where you can really see how people's kindness can really affect a leader. And he kind of makes up his mind of how he's treating other people as he's conquering. And we'll talk a little more again about that a little later. But he rewards kindness. But later, he realizes he can't stay, of course, on Long's Bank, and he ends up going back to the village, and he hides in the household of the man who he locked eyes with. And this man actually hides him for days. He's actually people are looking for him, and they're like, okay, he must be hiding in the village. Someone must be hiding him, and they actually search this yurt that he's hiding in, and he's safe because of this, one man who saves him. And later in life, of course, he honors this man. He gives him a really respected position because of him and his family, I should say, because they did hit him for that amount of time. After the search, they realize you can't stay here, dude. You have to go. And so the dead of night, they give him some supplies, a horse, and tell him go home. Stop bothering us, stuff giving us trouble. Go home and live your life. And he does, and he ends up going back to his family at this point. But he also still needs to go back for this girl that he's been working for. So he does end up going back to Borte and her clan. And at this point, they think he's actually been dead for a while. They're like, "Oh, you're still alive? Okay, we were kind of waiting to see what happens, but we didn't know if you were alive because we hadn't heard from you in all these years." Um, but then he ends up getting, married to Borte, which was, of course, the plan. Um, and as part of the dowry, his mom was given the sable coat. Now, Temujin sees an opportunity there, and he actually takes this coat from his mom. And sable is a luxury item. It's a really fancy thing. And he takes his coat and he goes to Toguro, who was his father's blood brother. And he's like, "Hey, you're allies with my dad. Let me give you this coat. Can we be allies too?" And, Toguro remembers his father vividly. And he's like, "You know what? You've given me this expensive coat. You're the rightful heir. And, your father was my blood brother. Yeah, I'm going to support you, you're making all the efforts to be proven to be the heir kind of thing to your father." But shortly thereafter, Borte actually gets abducted. This is another, as I said, where they kidnap brides and force them to be wives to other people. And Temujin doesn't agree with this. He's just like, "You just took the one person that I chose for myself in my life." And he takes Toguro and they go ham on this tribe. They pretty brutally beat them up. I think they killed quite a few members of that tribe, if I'm not mistaken. And they also, side note, this might be a revenge abduction for Holland's abduction, of course. But they get Borte back. And at this time, they find out Borte's pregnant. And they're not quite sure who's the baby daddy. And the reasons are, if the baby was born early, it would have been a sign that it was Temujin's. If the baby had been born on time, what they expected, it could have been either or if the baby was born late, it could have been someone else's child. But that doesn't matter to Temujin. He sees this child, which ends up being a boy. They name him Jochi. And he's like, "Well, here we go. There's my heir taken care of. I just say I'm the dad. No one can deny me because I take responsibility. And I have an heir. Worst case scenario, the kid dies. We'll have a couple more kids by then. I'm set for life. I just got to have a couple more kids." And they do. Shortly after Jochi's born, they end up having a daughter. And they end up in total having Borte and him have total 4 sons and 5 daughters. So he's not worried about heirs from Borte at all. But Borte is always his primary wife. He treats Borte with huge respect. She's considered like the second mother of the nation, for example, in Mongolia, just because of who she married and the fact that her husband did have that respect for her. So this is where we get all to the conquering stuff, the start of the conquering stuff at least. Kind of. I'll get to that reason. So Temujin, of course, while he's growing up, he has his own blood brothers as well. One of them allies himself, and they start conquering some clans. Nothing too fancy. They did a couple of families here and there to join their khanate. But eventually, that blood brother actually betrays him, along with Togril. And the defeat is so bad that the Temujin run to the Jurchens, which are another nomadic steppe people. At this time, they were the Jin dynasty in China because they had taken over northern China. And he actually ends up working for the Jurchens for about 10 years. And this is one of the points that we believe that 1162 was his birth year, because if this had happened later or earlier, he would either been too old or too young for this to happen. So we're pretty confident on that set of that 1162. But he ends up after 10 years, he ends up coming back and he tries again. Togril helps him. But Temujin loses again. So he realized that things are not working out. And this time when he loses the second time, by the way, Toguro does betray him. But he realizes things are not working out, and he has to start strategizing in what he's doing. And so you start using tactics like guerrilla warfare or false retreat, where you act like you're retreating, and all of a sudden, psych, we're actually attacking still. We just wanted some space for a second. He also tries to make his army look bigger than it really is. So at night, he might add some extra torchlights and some tents out there, which are completely, no one's in those tents, but it makes it look bigger. Or if they're marching through the night, they would put torches at key locations or have someone, walking way far behind to make them like the army's, still moving. And it's such a big army that, mounted archery also becomes particularly popular at this time. And again, that comes from, strategizing and stuff like that. We also start seeing, examples in his warfare, how he treats people later. Like if you're honest, he's gonna respect that. If you're dishonest, he's gonna chop you up. A good example of that is while he's fighting, there's someone who actually shoots his horse from under him, and after the fight's done, he asks straight out, "Okay, who shot my horse?" Like, come on, bro, not cool. And so this one archer, he gets a little defiant. He's like, "That was me. What do you want?" kind of thing. Like, he's like, "Come on, come at me, bro." And he realizes that this guy was being honest, and not only is he honest, he's actually a pretty skilled archer. So he's like, "Hey, you're my general now." And so, he rewards people that he respects. Another good example is when he finally defeats his blood brother that betrayed him. What actually happens? His men turns him in. He's like, "Hey, stop killing us. Here's this guy. Do what you want with him. We're done with fighting." And Temujin sees this, and he's like, "So you're betraying your master, then, right?" "Yeah." "Kill those guys. I don't want disloyalty here. Kill them." He ends up technically also killing their master too. But it was not a direct killing. He actually sends him out into the wilderness and fends himself, where he ends up dying because he can't take care of himself. He's by himself. People are not going to help him because they know that this guy betrayed the current leader. But this actually starts a time of peace in Mongolia. He actually unites the tribes again. And it's at this council that he's given the name and title of Chenggis Khan. Chenggis means great, and Khan, of course, means leader. So he was the great leader. So if you ever hear people call him the great leader, that's literally his title. But by this time, he's about 44 years old. So he's a little older than, a young buck would be. So when he creates peace, he gives out leadership to friends and family, of course, on his generals. But he's also very smart because he realized that all these tribes could betray him just like he was betrayed in his childhood. So he asked everybody to send one son from each ruling family. And I'm going to educate your kids. I'm going to give them good positions. And when you die, your son will come back to you and they'll be the next ruler. In doing so, he kind of makes a hostage situation. And not only a hostage situation, these sons are personal bodyguards. So he has a military now, this military only ended up ranking about, I think, about 1,100 people in total. So it's not his grand military, but it was more of a personal military in this case. Not only that, but because he's educating these kids, they're loyal to him, they protect him, and they're going to keep the other tribes in line in the process. So it's kind of a win-win situation. And everybody respected that. He wasn't out for blood so much, and even later in life, you don't really see him out for blood. He's out more for diplomacy in the end. Let me just adjust my notes so I can make sure I'm keeping up with what I have for you guys, because I don't have all the information typed down. So obviously we're going to get into one of those myths about the fact that he might be the father of the great grandfather of Asia. And we'll talk a little more of this towards the end. But to kind of give you some statistics and stuff like that, obviously while he's conquering, there's families out there. It's like, hey, take my daughter over here, or take my sister. We want like blood loyalty here, you know. And he does that. He also takes wives from people he does conquer. There's two wives that he actually they're both Tartars, and of course he ends up killing the Tartars because they killed his dad, right? He wanted out for revenge on that aspect. And he ends up taking two of the girls from the Tartar clan, and they're like, hey, I'll be loyal to you if you don't kill me and you don't kill my sister. And both those sisters actually did end up becoming principal wives, so not like Borte. Borte was always the supreme wife, but these women were key figures in that term. As I said, he never displaced Borte. Borte's always the key person. Um, there's not a lot of lust in there. Like a lot of people talking like he's a lustrous man. I mean, I guess if you want to talk about the two Tartar sisters, those could be considered a lust situation. Particularly one of them who's Usagin, not so much Usasui, which is the other sister. I guess that was a lust situation, but he's always very respectful towards women in his life, which is kind of cool. So, as I said, in the 90s, they theorized that most males in Asia could trace their heritage to a man around the same time as Genghis Khan in Mongolia. And of course, the theory then, of course, becomes Genghis Khan might be the father of Asia, the great grandfather of Asia. And we'll talk, I said, a little more in the end because I'm going to actually dispel this myth. I don't think this is actually a true thing about Genghis Khan. And as I said, we'll talk about it towards the end. So obviously, he's not out for conquering at this point. He never really he is a conqueror, but he's not out for conquering. So in 1211, the Jin dynasty actually sends an envoy to Chenggis Khan, and they're like, "Hey, you work for us." No, I don't. Yeah, you worked for us. You have to become a vassal state now. You're one of our vassal states. And Chenggis Khan is like, no, I'm my own man, thank you. And so in response, he actually attacks the Jin dynasty. And within 3 years, he actually takes over the capital. And so he tells the Jin emperor, stay here, don't make a fuss. We're going to finish conquering your lands, but if you stay here, you'll be fine. The Jin emperor doesn't listen, and he actually tries to escape the capital. And that's where they try to full on take over China. And they don't take over China until after Genghis Khan is gone. It's after him that they fully take over China. But this is the start of the process. And they continually are sending men to China. It's a very long process. The Chinese are not an easy army to defeat. So it takes time, but he's able to take at least northern China at this point. But here's where the fun stuff comes, and this is where we start seeing that push more westward. I mean, more east, yeah, more westward, towards Europe. Now, he never ends up going into Europe or even Russia by his lifetime, and we'll talk more about that in the myths of how we take Mongol history and contribute to Chenghis Khan, where it might not have been him who actually did it. But there's a empire to the west, and watch as I try to not butcher this name. Khwarezmian is how you pronounce that. Khwaremian name. Khwarezmian. And this is an empire that's primarily in Iran and Afghanistan at the time. And if you don't know too much about the history, they actually are the languages spoken in the major languages spoken in those areas are all the same language. You might hear it as Dari versus Farsi, for example. Same language, just dialectical to each other. But by this time, Chenghis Khan's in his 50s, so again, he's getting older, and he actually lives for another like 12 years after that, to be honest. But what ends up happening is Zhou Qi, Jochi is probably, as the oldest child, he's probably the punk in the group, to be honest. And he and some men were around the border area of these two empires, and he crosses the border. And I'm pretty sure he wasn't really meaning to do harm. As I said, he was kind of more of a punk. Um, but soldiers end up spotting their hoof prints, and they track Jochi down, realizing that, oh, we know who you are. You're probably trying to invade us, which wasn't the case at this point. So the battle ensues. Jochi and his men end up getting away by the cover in darkness, but he kind of has his tails between his legs, and he goes and complains to Daddy. Well, the Quarazze Empire actually, after this, sends in spies to both the Qin China, the Qin China, sorry, the Qin Dynasty. I probably should fix that later. Um, and they are snooping around, and they're finding out about these battles that Genghis Khan's doing and stuff like that. And they're hearing what's going on, and they're kind of afraid. They're like, well, what's preventing him from coming to us next? Are we next to be conquered? And as I said, just based on some of his history, I don't think he really was so much a conqueror as he just took over lands that pissed him off. But on the flip side, when Chenggis Khan hears what Jochi did, he sees this more as an opportunity. Hey, we can do trading between our nations. So he sends some merchants and some diplomats as envoys into the Khwarezmian Empire. Say that 10 times fast, right? And so they get to the town of Otra, and the governor sees them coming, and they're like, "Hey, yeah, we wanna trade with your empire. We're just in process of passing through for the capital." And he's like, "No, you guys are spies." And he ends up killing all but one person who ended up getting away. And this person was obviously lucky. I don't think it was intended for him to get away at all, based on what I've heard. But he, of course, goes back and tells Chenggis Khan, hey, they thought we were spies. And Chenggis is like, okay, I can understand. I mean, we were conquering for a second there, but it's all misunderstanding. Let's send a second envoy and again request trading from and he sends a new group over, and he tells them, I just want to trade. That's all I gotta tell him. My only request is the man who's responsible for the deaths of the first envoy, I want him to face some consequences. That's all. I'm pretty sure they can agree to the terms on that. Otherwise, it's just a trade thing, you know. Um, and so they send the next envoy. So the second one, they have ended up having one person killed and two people are humiliated. And again, they return to Chenggis Khan. Now he's like, okay, they're not listening to me, are they? Great. We're gonna have to start getting some revenge here. And so he pulls most of the troops from China and starts heading to the Khwarezmian Empire. And he brings along a few toys that he's gotten from China, which includes cannon and gunpowder, of course. So they kind of all break into three. The Mongol army breaks into three units, and they kind of just roam around the empire, just wreaking some havoc. And it makes it kind of difficult for the people of this empire to defend themselves because they're like, there's one group over here, there's a group over here, there's a group over there. And so they're kind of running a little around like chickens without a head. And then it's at this point we start seeing a very famous tactic that he's known for, and this is where he would destroy one city or group of cities, and then save some others because one reason or another. And he does not attack cities that surrender in a timely manner. I want to point this out. Like as I said, he got a nasty empire, a nasty reputation of being a killer. He wasn't a killer. He wanted a quick response. He wanted loyalty, and he wanted respect. He nothing else says anything else about him other than he wanted those things. So as these armies are traveling around, if they were given deadlines like, hey, we need a response by this time, if they weren't giving that response, or the, whatever council in the town wasn't agreeing with a quick response. It's like, okay, we're done with you. We'll start laying siege. And that siege warfare could have been, actual siege warfare or quick, hit and run tactics. He develops the siege warfare during the Jin period, where he actually starved the Jin people in the capital city for over a year before they actually surrendered. So as I said, as people are hearing these cities, are being destroyed because they didn't surrender, a lot more groups were like, okay, we're laying up hands. Why don't you come into our town? Do you want some food? Great. Let's get you some wine and stuff like that. So as I said, he really is not as brutal as people make him out to be. And during this warfare, he essentially takes over this empire. Now, some people don't consider it completely conquered until the last person who was in the ruling class was killed, and that's not after Chenggis' death, but he essentially kicks butt and leaves. So by the time he is done with conquering this one empire, he's about 60, and he is pressured to pick a successor. He picks his third son, Ogadai, and he's a prolific figure, and the rest of the expansion of the Mongol Empire. It's really him Ogadai who goes into Russia and to Hungary and stuff like that. He also finds Ogadai a little more level-headed. Jochi, this is not with the Khwarezmian Empire. It's not his first punk move he does. He does that kind of similar tactic in Russia where he goes in and people are like, oh no, they're conquering us. We got to kill them. And he escapes and then goes to his brothers like, hey, they were attacking me. So he sees Ogadai, kind of, the level-headed one in the group. But he ends up back in Mongolia, and shortly thereafter, the Xia, the Western Xia, which takes up most of Western China. That's where like Uyghurs live now. So these are like predecessors to the Uyghurs. They start acting up again, and he had previously fought with them, but they decided to be more punks again. And so he's like, okay, I guess we got to, suppress this rebellion. And he's pretty old. I mean, you're 60, especially at this point in time. It's not a laughing matter. They don't have the medical advancements that they do then. And so he's actually kept away from the front lines. He actually is, he's still advising from the back, but he is away from the front lines. And he gets to do fun stuff like, I'm going to go hunting today because, like, my generals are taking care of things. I'm going to go hunt. So he does, retirement related stuff. But this is one of the downfalls, of course. While he's hunting, he actually falls from his horse. And he's injured pretty badly. Around this time, there's also believed to be a pretty serious illness that goes around. And shortly after, he kind of passes away at the age of 65. And the year about this point is 1227. So he's done. This is the end of the legacy. This is where I'm saying he really doesn't do a lot of the things that people accredit him from. He's not conquering Russia. He's not in Hungary. This is the end of his story, except for, of course, all the myths that we now have to talk about and do some myth busting. One of the biggest myths about legends myths about Chenggis Khan is, where is he buried? And the direct answer is, we don't actually know where he's buried. One legend says that they took his funeral procession and they buried him, and then they have to have a sacrificial ladies and stuff like that. And they killed. And on the way back, they, chopped off the servants who were coming back who killed the sacrifices, and then they cut off the heads of the soldiers who, cut off the heads of the attendants. And they also, pretty much killed every village along the pathway. And that's not very much likely. You think that there would be more resources and dead bodies being discovered if that story really happened. There's another legend that says that a river was diverted, and so there's a river over his grave place. Again, you'd have some archaeological evidence of that, and that really doesn't exist either. The most popular theory is he's buried in a set of sacred mountains called the Burkhan Khaldun. sorry, which is a restricted area. It's a cultural heritage site for the Mongols, and because it's very, very sacred, they don't typically let people in. Like there's been incidents where they're like, we don't want to create an international incident because this stupid foreigner, you know. Um, but they usually, if they do let foreigners in, it's you're a high profile person. There's no cameras allowed, and they don't really even show him very much. I think that there's like a shrine up there that they show them, and it's not even a shrine to Chenggis Khan or anything. It's just like oh, this is our sacred shrine, you know. Like they like very much deflect if he's really buried there or not. Um, then of course there's a couple of other myths about him. As I said, his expansion didn't involve Russia, it didn't involve the Middle East, it didn't involve Hungary. That expansion comes out much later with his sons and grandsons. Another one is the attempt at Japan. The sons and grandsons try to take over Japan, which has its own story. If you ever heard of the term kamikaze, it actually comes from this period where the Japanese. So there's a island called Satsuma, and it's kind of halfway between Korea and Japan. Um, there's a samurai family there, of course, a daimyo and his samurai, of course, and they were very, they were kind of like, oh, they're not going to harm us. It's going to be nothing. They're not going to get over here. So they very greatly underestimated the Mongol army. So the Mongols built some ships under it was Kublai Khan, I believe, at this point in time. He was trying to conquer them. So they sent some ships. They get to the island, they fight for a day, they retreat back to their ships at night, and a typhoon comes through this area and destroys all the ships. This exact story happens the second time. They built more ships, they had more people go over to Satsuma, they fight for a day, they go back to the ships at night, and another typhoon comes through. This is pretty decently documented, and so the word kami means God or divine, and kaze is wind, so divine wind. So if you ever hear that story, that's where that comes from. He doesn't get all control of all of China. Now let's go back to that one about him being the father of Asia. There's a couple of reasons why I don't think he's the father of Asia. So when people try to use this statistic about Genghis Khan, like, oh, but he fathered so many children that a certain amount of the population is descended from him. No, kinda, sorta, kinda. So the answer is he is maybe the father of Asia, but he is not the father of Asia because he fathered so many children. It's because his kids fathered so many children, and their kids fathered so many children. So the estimates for his children that he might have had is 4 to 12 sons and a couple of dozen daughters. And how genetics works in this case about patrilineal lineage, you can only find out about patrilineal lineage to a particular person through a male line. So if I was to take a DNA test to learn more about my patrilineal lineage, all that was going to tell me was like my ancestors came from Germany and England and Scotland and Ireland. That's all it's going to tell me. It's not going to be like, hey, we traced your ancestors to this one person. Only for people who can do that are male descendants. So if I wanted to learn that information, I'd have to get one of my dad's brothers or my own brother or my one of my male I only have one male cousin on that family side of the family. I'd have to get one of them to do that, or I could also do someone who maybe is a little more distantly related, as long as they're within that male line. That would be the only way you can determine that kind of thing. So if he only had 4 to 12 sons, that does not equate to the amount of people that they're talking about. And as I said, this is where it kind of be like he could still be that. He did have one son who had like 40 kids, and let's say half of them were boys, that's 20 sons, who then, if they were in the ruling class, probably had a couple of wives and probably had large families themselves. And even on top of that, the other thing you have to think about is if we were looking at other people in the medieval and ancient world, the person who had the most kids that we know of in terms of numbers was probably Ramses II, who we know had 160 plus kids. Ramses II came to power decently young. So he had a chance to, build up a family because he wasn't traveling, he wasn't hiding or anything. Chenggis Khan had to run and hide at times. He got his butt kicked before he started being a leader. So that wouldn't make sense that he had time to have, a bunch of sex and have a bunch of kids in response. So as I said, it doesn't totally make sense that he is potentially the father of Asia, as much as it might have been one of his sons. And because he's in that matrilineal line, he becomes the father of Asia because he had a bunch of kids who had a bunch of kids. So that's pretty much the fun facts about Chenggis Khan and some of the myths evolving around him. Does anybody have any questions or, want to know a little more about maybe what happened after he was gone? Tough crowd, tough crowd.
I'm good.
Fair enough. I mean, it's a lot of fun stuff. There's a lot of stories around him that I try to do it more as a story. Like he has a lot of fun little stories that people don't realize about him. Like he's not, as I said, really a villain other than he killed his brother that one time. A lot of
He
the
killed
stuff
his brother that one time, yeah.
yeah, that one time. Though, yeah, the one time he killed his brother. But I mean, to be fair, with the other half brother that he actually treated him pretty decently after he killed his older half brother. The younger half brother got treated decently, I should say. Um, pushed out a little bit, but he was given a decent title, the younger half brother. But yeah, as I said, a lot of people contribute to him being really savage, and it really doesn't fit what he did. He only attacked after either A, being attacked, or B, being insulted, or out of pure revenge. He doesn't necessarily, as I said, try to go conquering. He's just like, you screwed with me, you get the bull by the horns now, kind of thing. Well, if that's it, I think we're done for the day.
Awesome. Thank you, Ashleigh.
No problem. Hope you guys learned something today.
All right, I will go ahead and end the recording and the meeting, and see you at our meeting on Tuesday.
Probably not. I don't think I'm gonna head up.
Class. Yeah, don't forget to
Yes, log. Get yourself your points.
All right, take care, everyone.
See ya.
Bye-bye.
Bye.